It's kind of simple because we needed to define equity in our school district before we could start doing the equity work. We put in an equity policy back in 2019 in the district, and so for us, equity means that every student receives the opportunities and support he or she needs to maximize his or her gifts and talents as they pursue their pathways to purpose. And so that's a part of our mission and our vision statement, is this idea that every student is inherently gifted and talented, and has a unique design and purpose for their lives. It's our responsibility to find and help them illuminate the pathways in which they're going to achieve that purpose of their life. And so equity is then giving them the opportunities and supports that they need to be able to do that. And that looks different for different students, but it's our responsibility to figure out what that looks like for each student, and then give that and put that in place, and really to give them a platform to be the best versions of themselves.
Wow, I think it's pretty cool that one of the first things you said was that your district, you all's district, have an equity policy. Mark and I are finishing our book. It's called One, a Process for Schools of Excellence. And in there, I just finished writing this morning. It's probably 4:45, 5 o'clock this morning, that equity is not enough. We have to just stop talking about equity. We need to produce equitable outcomes. And if you don't have equity policies, it's impossible for schools and school districts to produce equitable outcomes.
So we have an every student, every class, every teacher, every day philosophy when we think about equity. And that has led us to a tremendous alignment between our mission, our beliefs, our purpose, our instructional design, and our assessment system, all aligned regardless of programming, regardless of demographics, regardless of socioeconomic status. We have a definition of rigor that we expect to see in every class, every single day, no matter whether we're in kindergarten or whether we're in high school, in an AP senior class. And it's quite simply this. We want students constructing knowledge through disciplined inquiry that has value beyond school.
Well, equity, it starts with us by answering the simple question. And it's a question that is, I'm sure many of our viewers are familiar with. It's a question from the Maasai tribe in Kenya and Tanzania. When they would greet one another, they would ask the question, how are the children? And in unison, that response was supposed to be, all the children are well. And so the question is, how are the children? And so our responsibility is being able to emphatically answer the question that all the children are well. And so how do we do that in our school district, or in a school district, I would say? And of course, it starts with many of the simplistic things that we think about, but then there are some very detailed things that we have to do as it relates to a framework. But I think really, truly, Stephen, where it begins is that everyone has to believe that and are working toward that goal. There's a lot of jargon and a lot of positioning and a lot of conversation around equity right now, because it's really popular to talk about equity. But you really got to see the equity in the work, and you really have to see that equity in practice and the consistency of doing those things. And so systematically, how are you using your data, disaggregating your data? What types of messages are you sending when you disaggregate your data and you share? When you talk about the student body population in your school district, how are you equitably allocating resources based on the student needs in your school districts? Are all your students getting the same amount of resources and fundings and opportunities, or are you equitably distributing those things? The reviewing of your policies, procedures, and practices to ensure that you're really working to identify and dismantle institutional barriers that create inequity to begin with. So so for our district, we're really looking at structures that create inequity to begin with. What are those barriers? Things like prerequisite courses. Are you still stuck on the idea that you have to have prerequisite courses in order to be able to access certain things? What are the things how are you identifying gifted and talented? Is gifted and talented is still just based on reading and math skills? Or are you really looking at gifted and talentedness from a standpoint of artistic gifted and talentedness? What does that look like in your school district? Because you know your students from an impoverished community or low wealth community will not score at those ratings or those levels for gifted and talented at an early elementary level because they're coming in with some sort of a deficit. And acknowledging that is not saying that you don't believe in high expectations for those students. It's acknowledging the fact that poverty truly does have an impact on student performance. And now you have to dismantle the barrier that is not allowing those students to access the resources that will allow them to gain some of that knowledge that they're going to need in order to be successful academically. In your recruiting and employing of staff, high quality staff, are you equitable and essentially have programs in place to create or recruit diverse, develop the diversity that you have, and retain the diversity that you have? If you know that 77% of the teacher population are white females, do you have programs to recruit men of color to your classrooms, understanding that there's a population of students who really truly benefit from those things? Offering opportunities to your employees, encouraging your staff for continuous growth. There are so many things that are aligned or part of really demonstrating that equity is really at the forefront of the things that is at the forefront of what you do.
You know, some of your most adept problem solvers are your children in poverty because they're problem solving every single day. And so I think it is about coming from not a deficit mindset, but coming from a strength mindset, and understanding that a lot of our children that are in challenging circumstances are incredible problem solvers and creative problem solvers, but yet that's not what traditional education typically values. So how do we create an instructional design where we are able to scaffold the skills for them, but help to honor their creative problem solving skills? And when we make that mindset, when we make that shift, there's some really magical things that happen. And so for us, over the last many years, there's been a tremendous shift from knowing to doing. And what's really interesting is that a lot of our parents who are more affluent and our parents who have students that are gifted and talented, when you move from knowing to doing, you now move the goalpost for them. And there could be some real significant pushback for that. So
it's amazing today that we have a large inner city school district and we have a smaller district. So it represents our participants, those of you who are with us this afternoon. You get to look through both lenses. Speak to us a little bit about how, as a leader, you had the courage to not only identify that you have that need in your school district, but more courage to do something about it.
It was simple. Visiting classes every day. As a building principal, as an assistant superintendent and a superintendent, visiting schools and visiting classrooms every day. And I'm looking at students in our school district, and our school district is 60% African American and about 12% Hispanic. And I'm looking at the cultural experiences that students are gaining in classrooms, and they're not getting or connecting. Those cultural experiences are not being replicated in their classroom experience. And so understanding what the research also suggests about students of color and having and being taught by someone of the same cultural background, giving them an opportunity to be to reduce their dropout rates, to increase graduation rates. It has an impact on the percent of students going to college. But I also think the benefit that all students get from having a cultural experience, such as having teachers of different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds teaching their courses.
Mm-hmm.
Our white students benefit from that, and also white teachers benefit from having colleagues of different cultural backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So that we all benefit, we all benefit from it. And so diversity can't just simply be a catchphrase or a buzzword about just having different people in the room. It's about being diverse and being inclusive, and then trying to incorporate diversity and that inclusiveness into the school experience or the learning experiences for our students.
What are some practical first steps to take when your organization may not be, in quotation marks, ready for the professional learning or the conversations about equity? That's a really great question, Ratanya, and I'm glad I am passing that question on to my friends Baron and Mike. Take it away, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'll jump in since Baron's been going first every time. There's this idea of targeted universalism, and this idea of targeted universalism is this idea. I think it's a professor out of Berkeley that talks about it. It's this idea that as a humanity, we all share some common aspirations for one another, and so there is an entry point there to begin to have this conversation that we're not. We don't have to have specific conversations, but we can talk about what are the threads that bring us all together. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of having clarity around your purpose, but also building that coalition, that broad coalition of stakeholders in your community, and thinking about just some of those very large questions about, what do we want for our community? What kind of community do we want to be? What kind of schooling experience do we want all of our children to have? And when you start to break out some of those very large conversations, you start to see that no matter where people are on-ramping into this conversation, they all share a set of values that you can build upon.
To echo what Mike is saying as well, I would say one of the first places to start is with yourself and do self-reflection. What are your perceived biases? What are your perceived, what are your issues? What are the things that you care? How do you feel about equity? Why do you think equity is important? And really truly understand your foundation in this, because if you're going to lead the work, you just need to go into the work knowing that you're going to get pushed and tested. So I would say, and check your heart. Make sure your heart is completely in it, because you're going to get bruised up. Everyone's not going to understand. So I say this to say, understand where you are and where you're having these real conversations, right? Because you do have to recognize that when you start talking about equity and inequity, that means some are going to have to give up some things they've been traditionally conditioned or used to having, right? So ideally they're thinking you're taking something away from me to make something better for someone else, and I do not want that to happen. So if you think that your community, everyone in your community is gonna feel great about the equity conversation, or everyone, I just can tell you right now, it's not gonna happen. So whether we cloak it, regardless of what words or terminology we cloak it in, the real rawness of it is you're trying to take something away that I have been traditionally been gifted or given consideration to have. And that's the real deal. So you're going to get bruised up. So to pull up or uproot anything is going to require that you're going to get dirty. You're going to get scratched up. If you go into your garden and you need to pull up some weeds, or you need to pull up a hedge or something that's been growing for a long time, such as inequities in schools, you need to expect to get some scrapes and bruises. So that's the first thing, is to realize that and make sure that your heart is truly, truly into it. And you start with, like I said, with the self-reflection. What I think is a great strategy as a first step is identify a barrier or something that's there that is clearly an inequitable, a situation of inequity. And then just have conversations around that. Let's just pick one thing. Don't pick 50 things. Don't eat the whole pie at one time. Identify something just very simple, right? Let's just take, for example, access to tutoring services after school hours. Okay, so if you want to keep it academically and not socially. Do all my students have an opportunity to participate in after school tutoring? What are the limitations to those students getting tutoring? Is it transportation? Is it lack of finance, resources? What are some things? Okay, so let's address this. How do we address this? And then you can pick up momentum. Then now you can move to another thing. Then you can start looking at, well, wow, is there a system in place that this is supported, or a structure that supports this inequity? Now let's really start looking at the structure that supports this inequity, and let's start removing the structure. But here's the other piece. As you tear down one structure, you got to build another structure that's equitable. But do not make the mistake, and this is my opinion, of trying to build an equitable structure while an inequitable structure exists. We've already tried that. We've tried that already with separate but equal. That doesn't work. It's not. It's because one of them is going to be sustained and one of them is not going to be sustained. So you got to get rid of the inequitable structure so that you can build an equitable structure. But do not try to create this duality, this dual structure in your school systems, because I don't think it's going to be successful.